Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
Bryan Kohberger wants to take back that guilty plea and go to trial. I'm laying out the evidence of planning by Kohberger that prosecutors say would have been the nail in his coffin. Let's get into it. I'm Angenette Levy, and this is Crime Fix. Bryan Kohberger, he has a lot of time on his hands. In fact, he has nothing but time to sit and think inside his prison cell. He's now 31 years old, and at this point, barring some major wins for him in court, that's where he'll be sitting for the rest of his life. Kohberger pleaded guilty in July of 2025 to the horrific stabbings of Kaylee Goncalves, Maddie Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin in the house on King Road. The 4 students were murdered in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Prosecutors say they were able to uncover digital evidence that linked him to the purchase of the murder weapon, a K-bar knife. And they said his DNA linked him to the sheath of the K-bar knife, although the knife was never recovered. Recently, Judge Hippler unsealed a document that outlined the timeline of Bryan Kohberger's purchases. This came before Kohberger filed a petition for post-conviction relief earlier this week, saying he was coerced by his defense attorneys to plead guilty and made promises that were never kept. He claims he's actually innocent. Kohberger filed that petition just days before a documentary on Netflix was set to drop, and that series is now airing. Kohberger remains behind bars in Idaho's maximum security institution in Kuna. He spends his days in a cell alone, by himself, and he's now asserting his innocence. Attorneys that I have spoken with believe this motion for post-conviction relief is a long shot at best. Now we're getting a look at some of the mistakes that prosecutors say Kohberger made during the murders, the timeline that led up to the horrific murders on November 13th, 2022. Now, this court filing, unsealed by Judge Hippler, reveals an expert was going to testify about Bryan Kohberger's spending, what he was buying, and how he was making purchases before and after the murders. Some of this information is disturbing, and some of it's just downright confusing. A major piece of evidence prosecutors would have focused on: the K-bar knife, a sheath, and a sharpener purchased off Amazon. Investigators found the sheath next to Maddie Mogen's body, but they never recovered the sharpener or the knife. Prosecutors certainly believe a K-bar knife was the murder weapon because of the sheath left at the scene. We knew that Bryan Kohberger bought a K-bar knife, sheath, and sharpener in March of 2022, 8 months before the murders. And now we're seeing what a rep from Amazon was going to testify to at Kohberger's trial. First, Kohberger's Amazon account was owned by him. Shane Cox was going to testify that Kohberger set up his Amazon account in October 2017, and his email was attached to it. Now, a lot of people have Amazon accounts. That's not a big deal. But Kohberger's lawyers were fighting tooth and nail to get this evidence from coming in at trial. They argued the account was shared by the family, and showing what someone clicked on could be misleading. They fought and fought against this testimony coming in at trial.
Because in terms of machine learning, one component is that when there's a household account where there's multiple users with multiple cell phones and multiple laptops going into purchases, there's machine learning and cross references there. In terms of the way that Amazon works as a company globally and artificial intelligence, they're doing all kinds of things to understand what consumers and purchasers and sellers are trying to do to actually prompt people to buy certain things. So in this instance, with regard to these purchases, we have very limited data regarding Mr. Kohberger's purchases without the metadata and the context. And that's the reason that we are seeking to exclude it.
Now we know why Kohberger's defense wanted this information excluded so badly. Shane Cox was going to testify that the customer purchased an electronic gift card for $130 using the Bryan C. Kohberger account. The billing information was for Bryan Kohberger at his family's home in Pennsylvania, and a Visa card for Kohberger was used to purchase the gift card. This was on March 22nd, 2022, 7.5 months before the murders. The plan, prosecutors would have argued, was already in motion. And the next day, the purchase for the knife was made. Cox was going to testify that on March 21st, 2022, the electronic gift card was used to purchase a K-bar sharpener for $23.40 through the Bryan C. Kohberger account. At the same time, the customer purchased a K-bar full-size Marine Corps fighting knife for $86.15. Also purchased with the gift card, omega-3 vegan DHA supplements for $20.45 using that electronic gift card. The expert was also going to testify that click activity on Kohberger's account was going to show that Kohberger was viewing pages related to K-bar style knives on the same day the gift card was purchased and the knife was purchased. Then, in the days after Kohberger ordered the K-bar knife, sheath, and sharpener, he was checking on the shipping progress. The prosecutors said between March 22nd and March 27th, 2022, Amazon.com click activity for the Bryan C. Kohberger account shows each day that the customer was viewing pages associated with the shipping progress of the Amazon.com order for the K-bar knife and sharpener purchased on March 21st, 2022. Now, this raises a question. Was Bryan Kohberger planning to carry out murders in Pennsylvania, or was he thinking ahead to his move to Washington State? We don't know. Nearly 8 months after buying the K-bar knife on November 13th, 2022, in the early morning hours, Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana were stabbed to death in the home on King Road, the K-bar knife sheath found next to Maddie's leg. 2 days later, it appears Bryan Kohberger was working to potentially cover his tracks had he realized he left the K-bar sheath behind. Prosecutors wrote that Shane Cox would testify that 2 days after the murders on November 15th, 2022, Amazon.com click activity showed the customer navigated to a page related to deletion of account activity. So 2 days after the murders, prosecutors were going to present testimony that Kohberger tried to delete his Amazon account, but he didn't. Prosecutors wrote, on November 23rd, 2022, and December 6th, 2022, the Amazon click activity for the Bryan Kohberger account shows the customer was viewing pages associated with K-bar style knives with sheaths from this Amazon account. Prosecutors had mentioned in court documents previously that the November 23rd and December 6th searches for a K-bar sheath made them wonder whether Kohberger was looking for a replacement knife and sheath in case the cops came knocking on his door, or was he looking for a replacement to kill again? There were also a number of purchases that Bryan Kohberger made that prosecutors planned to show to the jury. Along with the Amazon records, prosecutors were going to present records from Crypto.com for Bryan Kohberger. There were also records related to Dick's Sporting Goods, Marshall's, records from a credit union in Pennsylvania, and other bank records. There were also records from Target and Under Armour, Venmo records, and records from Walmart and Winco, a grocery store about a mile from King Road. And Kohberger, back in August of 2022, opened a new bank account, depositing $2,000. Prosecutors say he only started withdrawing cash from that account on the morning of the murders and only used cash to make purchases starting on November 10th, 2022, 3 days before the homicides. Okay, so there's a lot more to dig into than what I've just read to you and talked to you about. So let's bring in Joe Giacalone. He is a retired cold case sergeant with the NYPD, also the host of the great show on YouTube, True Crime with the Sarge. Joe, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Angenette.
So, Joe, your first reaction to looking at these expert reports, Bryan Kohberger, we knew he bought that K-bar knife. We had heard about that in March of 2022. But when you really look at the details laid out and the fact that he's checking the shipping progress day after day after day, whoa, what do you make of all of that?
Yeah, there were several things that jumped off the page when I was reading through this. So not to jump too far ahead, but I guess the two biggest takeaways were exactly how the financial investigator from the FBI was going to lay out the case for all these purchases and all those different things. But also the flip side of it was, I think they went through 49 devices and they found zero link between Kohberger and the victims, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. So they would have had some good stuff for their case, but they would have had some other stuff that the defense would have been able to hang in on.
And let's talk about that, because they've mentioned before that they went through everything looking for a link between Bryan Kohberger and these victims, and they didn't find anything. The closest thing we've ever heard about is a cache like a cached image from Google Maps on Kohberger's phone that was something about the Mad Greek restaurant, but that could have been anything. So how scary is this to you as somebody who investigated crimes for so many years that he just targeted maybe that house, or just drove around and found sorority girls and went in there and did this?
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing. And I think this is where the prosecution kind of dropped the ball. They dropped the ball in a couple places, but this one, I think, not trying to narrow down a motive, the reason why this happened. Generally, when you have a big case like this, where you have, unfortunately, 4 homicides, the law enforcement hasn't learned anything from this offender. They haven't learned anything about what he did and how he chose his victims. And this is something even now we're seeing with Rex Heuermann in the Long Island serial
Yes.
killer case, right? The FBI is stepping in. They want to know how he did this and why he did this, and he was using their book, so to speak, as a textbook. We have similar situation here. We have a criminal justice student, PhD student. We have all the different things that he's learned, but how does he come across these victims will remain, unfortunately, a mystery forever.
And that is so interesting. I've brought this up so many times that in the Heuermann case, there was a proffer. And those proffers started months before the guilty plea. And so this was done meticulously and slowly. And part of Rex Heuermann's guilty plea was that he is required to cooperate with the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. We have nothing in this case. In the Idaho case, we have no proffer. There was no proffer. So he didn't offer any information. He had to do nothing. And then we still don't know where the murder weapon is. And there was that we know of, there's been no mention. There's nothing in that plea agreement about him cooperating with the FBI behavioral analysis unit. And it's just such a stark contrast when you look at it.
And when you think about this, Angenette, Idaho had the death penalty dangling over his head. They could have made him talk and basically talk and dance as much as they wanted, as far as I'm concerned. They didn't have that in New York, but you had a prosecutor who was pretty much on the ball with a lot of different things and said, maybe it's the experience matters sometimes in these cases. And they held the stake out and they said, hey, listen, this is what you're going to do. And he went for it. But, Idaho was a whole different story. And I said it's a shame because whoever people think about the death penalty, however they feel, that's not the discussion here. The discussion is from the law enforcement perspective, the death penalty holds a lot of keys in getting more information out of your suspect or perpetrator, however you want to look at this. And they had it, and they didn't take advantage of it, as far as I'm concerned.
Let's go back to the purchase. The purchase was made in March of 2022 of the K-bar knife sheath and sharpener. The sharpener part just freaks me out. And then it's made on, he buys a gift card, first of all, to buy this stuff. I'm assuming he thinks that's going to hide it. I don't know how he would think that. I don't understand the gift card part of this because everything, there's a record of it all. So he buys the gift card. The next day he buys all of these items, and then he's clicking, they say, every day, searching to see when the progress. Does this raise concerns to you that maybe he was thinking about doing this before he moved to Washington, like possibly targeting somebody in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, he was getting antsy, it looks like, right? And from what we learned, he's had some sort of like a compulsive behavior that has, led him to do some other things. So this is, yeah, I mean, it looked like he could have struck at any time, but he was lacking that weapon, and that was something that was going to be important to him. I mean, that's how I read into that. And the fact that he also tries to delete some of his search history, too, showed the fact that he knew what he was doing, but then he wanted to try to cover his tracks, too. But folks, as we know, I mean, everything with the financial records, everything is recorded online no matter what you do. So it's just unfortunate that, we have a situation where we just haven't learned from this.
Yeah, and he went back and tried to delete his Amazon account, or looked at how to delete it, 2 days after the homicides. So he knew that says to me, Joe, that he knew that he had left that sheath there, that he had screwed up. But then he decided, I guess, not to delete his account.
Right. I mean, to me, that's the equivalent of throwing bleach on the electronic crime scene, right? Anytime you try to delete your, in this case, purchases or social media accounts or anything like that, before, during, or after a crime is a big red flag. And as we've seen in this case and any other cases, they can still go and get that information in more often than not.
Let's move on now to December. And in December, the investigation's heating up. And they say he's clicking again all over Amazon looking for a K-bar knife and sheath. So, it raises the question, was he looking for that in case the cops came coming? Like, oh, I'm going to go buy a replacement? Or was he getting like ginned up and revved up to possibly do this again?
Well, I think both of those are things that investigators were concerned about while this was going on. To me, it's more or less that he was preparing for another event. He saw how well that weapon worked in the last time, and I think he figured out this was going to be his weapon of choice moving forward. And considering this was going on about a month or so after it, I think, honestly, he thought he got away with it.
Let's now turn to the financial activity they said took place both before the homicides and after. They say he put $2,000 in an account in July of 2022 and then didn't touch it and start making cash withdrawals out of that money until after the homicides. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I guess he was going to be using it as like on the run kind of money, where he was going to have access to this after the event, just in case he had to leave the state or leave the area. He would have access to money until things cooled down, and then he would come back. But unfortunately for him, those ATMs with the cameras got not only his pictures, but they also got the white car without having the white, the license plate in the front, which was a big part of the investigation.
And that's what I don't understand. I don't understand why he thought withdrawing cash. That's one of the huge questions in this case. Why did he think not using his debit or credit cards in the days leading up to the homicides and then after only using cash? How on earth does that help you when you're still having to withdraw the money out of the ATM? You're still being captured on camera. You're still having a record of those transactions. What do you make of that?
Just another mistake added onto his list of mistakes that he's made, where he thought he was going to be smarter than the investigators because he knew all this background information about criminal justice and policing and crime scenes and all the other things that go along with it. And I think the arrogance is what kind of trips him up at this point.
But the saving up of the $2,000, I mean, it just seems like a lot of money for a criminal justice PhD student to be setting aside and putting in an account. It's like it was like his murder bank. For some reason he's thinking withdrawing cash after I do this is going to be helpful.
Right. He forgot the part that he's going to need an electronic device in order to access that cash. Right. So we won't tell people maybe there was a better way of doing it, but there was a better way of doing it. But he's just got himself all caught up in this thing. And like I said, he thought he had committed the perfect crime and he had it all planned out well in advance. And he had a rainy day fund that was going to help him get through some of the tough times as the search was going on.
Insane. It's just absolutely crazy to me. I mean, the amount of premeditation and planning that went into this, it wasn't just a couple of weeks. It was months and months. And it appears to be about 8 months, maybe even longer, that he was planning this.
And the fact that this looks totally random to me is even more odd or odder because, like I said, not having, I think it was 49 devices according to that document, 49 different things that they've checked with zero connection between him and these 4 victims, to me is just like a real like wow moment, saying like this looks totally random that he just found this house and decided this was it. I find that hard to believe, in certain aspects. Like, how did he know who was going to be where? How did he know that there was 2 different floors and who was going to be in what beds? So...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that may be one of his big mistakes. I don't think he knew for certain. I think that he went there looking for one person and things didn't go according to his sick plan. That's my theory, but you may feel differently.
No, I mean, of course. And I mean, he leaves a victim alive, too, that he actually probably saw. It's just that I think he was just too exhausted at that point or too zoned out or in a zone that he wasn't able to, act upon that and walked out. And for that person, they are lucky to be alive.
Joe Giacalone, host of True Crime with the Sarge, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Angenette.
So Bryan Kohberger remains in prison in Idaho. He's seeking post-conviction relief, claiming exculpatory evidence wasn't disclosed to him. He calls the plea agreement a broken plea. Just like the book, an author wrote about his case a couple of months ago. And remember, you can read the entire Bryan Kohberger case file on our app, Law&Crime Plus. Check it out. So we're going to keep an eye on this and let you know where this goes. That's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.